Once upon a time in the north, the bitter Arctic wind howled across the frozen tundra, carrying with it the sting of ice and the promise of a long, unforgiving winter. Against this harsh backdrop, a lone balloon drifted through the leaden sky, its colorful envelope a stark contrast to the monochrome landscape below. In the basket, a young man with a weather-beaten face and eyes that sparkled with adventure adjusted the burner, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. This was Lee Scoresby, aeronaut extraordinaire, barely into his 20s, and already making a name for himself in the cutthroat world of Arctic exploration. His daemon Hester, a Arctic hare with fur as white as the snow below, huddled close for warmth. Lee, Hester's voice was barely audible over the wind. "Are you sure about this? Novy Odense doesn't exactly sound like a welcoming place for a couple of rookies like us." Lee's laugh was as warm as his surroundings were cold. "Now, Hester, when have I ever steered us wrong?" The hare's silence spoke volumes, causing Lee to chuckle again. All right. But this time it's different. I've got a good feeling about this place." As they descended towards the ramshackle port town of Novy Odense, the details of the settlement came into sharp focus. Wooden buildings, their paint long since scored away by the relentless Arctic elements, huddled together as if for warmth. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, creating a hazy ceiling that hung low over the town. The harbor was a forest of masts, ships of all sizes locked in the grip of the frozen sea. Lee guided the balloon to a relatively clear area on the outskirts of town, the basket touching down with a soft crunch on the packed snow. As he secured the balloon, a small crowd of curious onlookers began to gather, their faces a mix of suspicion and intrigue. "Well, Hester," Lee muttered as he shouldered his pack, "let's go make some friends." The town of Novy Odense was a melting pot of cultures and species, a frontier outpost where the lines between law and lawlessness blurred, like marriages in the desert. As Lee made his way down the main street, he took in the sights and sounds of this rough-and-tumble community. Grizzled trappers haggled with merchants over the price of furs, their voices rising above the general din. A group of sailors, their skin weathered by salt and sun, stumbled out of a tavern, singing a bawdy song in a language Lee didn't recognize. And everywhere, people's daemons scurried, flew, or loped alongside them. A menagerie of Arctic fauna that added to the wild atmosphere of the place. Lee's destination was the harbor master's office, a squat building that looked like it had been cobbled together from the remnants of a dozen shipwrecks. As he approached, the door burst open, and a man came flying out, landing face-first in a snowbank. "And stay out, you mangy bilge rat," a voice bellowed from inside. Lee raised an eyebrow at Hester, who merely twitched her nose in response. Stepping over the groaning man, Lee entered the office. Behind a desk piled high with papers sat the largest man Lee had ever seen. His beard was a tangled mass of gray and white, looking for all the world like a storm cloud had decided to take up residence on his face. His daemon, a walrus of impressive proportions, dozed in a pool of water that took up half the room. "What do you want?" the man growled, not bothering to look up from the document he was scrawling on. Lee cleared his throat. "Name's Lee Scoresby, sir. I'm an aeronaut, just arrived in town. I was hoping to inquire about any work that might be available for a man of my talents." At this, the harbor master did look up, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise. "An aeronaut, eh? Don't see many of your kind up here." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "As it happens, there might be something. There's a mining company, Northern Lights, that's been looking for someone to do some aerial surveys of the nearby mountain range. Dangerous work, mind you. The weather up there is as likely to kill you as make you rich." Lee's eyes lit up at the prospect. "Danger's my middle name, sir. Where can I find these Northern Lights folks?" The harbor master chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tin can. "They've got an office down by the docks. Can't miss it. It's the only building with a fresh coat of paint. But word to the wise, boy. Watch yourself around them. They didn't get where they are by playing nice." With a nod of thanks, Lee turned to leave, but the harbor master's voice stopped him. "One more thing, aeronaut. There's a storm brewing, and I don't just mean the weather. This town's about to become a powder keg, and your arrival might just be the spark that sets it off. Tread carefully." Lee mulled over the harbor master's words as he made his way to the Northern Lights office. Nouvelle Odense did seem to have an undercurrent of tension running through it like a wire, pulled taut and ready to snap. The Northern Lights office was indeed hard to miss, its pristine white facade standing out starkly against the weathered buildings surrounding it. As Lee approached, the door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was striking, with raven hair and eyes as cold and blue as glacial ice. Her daemon, a snow leopard, padded silently beside her. "Mr. Scoresby, I presume?" Her voice was cultured with a hint of an accent. Lee couldn't quite place. "I'm Ms. Polyakova, representative of Northern Lights. We've been expecting you." Lee's surprise must have shown on his face because Ms. Polyakova's lips curved in a small, amused smile. "News travels fast in a small town, Mr. Scoresby. Especially news of a young, daring aeronaut arriving unannounced. Please, come inside. We have much to discuss." The interior of the office was as immaculate as the exterior. All polished wood and gleaming brass. Polyakova led Lee to a comfortable chair in front of a large desk behind which sat a man whose very presence seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "Mr. Scoresby," the man's voice was as cold as his appearance, "I am Mr. Larson, Director of Northern Lights Operations in this region. I understand you're looking for work." Lee nodded, suddenly feeling very young and out of his depth. "Yes, sir. I heard you might be in need of an aeronaut for some survey work." Larson's laugh was devoid of humor. "Survey work? Is that what they're calling it these days?" He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Lee's. "Let me be frank, Mr. Scoresby. What we need is someone who can fly into disputed territory. Someone who can navigate not just the treacherous air currents of the mountains, but also the equally dangerous political currents of this region." Lee felt Hester tense against his leg. This was starting to sound like much more than a simple surveying job. Larson continued, seemingly oblivious to Lee's discomfort. "There's a particular valley, deep in the heart of the mountains, rich with minerals that could make Northern Lights, and anyone who helps us, very wealthy indeed. But it's in a contested area. The local tribes claim it as their ancestral land, and there are other interested parties as well. Other parties? Lee couldn't help but ask. Ins? Polyakova answered, her voice smooth as silk. Let's just say that Northern Lights isn't the only company with an interest in the resources of this region, but we intend to be the ones to claim them. Lee's mind raced. This was far more complicated and potentially far more lucrative than he had anticipated, but it was also fraught with danger, and not just the physical kind. I'll need some time to consider your offer, Lee said, trying to keep his voice steady. Larson's eyes narrowed. Of course. But don't take too long, Mr. Scoresby. Opportunities like this don't come along every day, especially not for young men in need of making a name for themselves. As Lee left the Northern Lights office, his head spinning with the implications of what he'd just heard, he nearly collided with a man hurrying down the street. The man steadied Lee with a hand that seemed unnaturally warm in the frigid air. "Careful there, young fellow," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "It's dangerous to walk around with your head in the clouds in a town like this." Lee looked up into a face that seemed far too kind for its surroundings. The man was older, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that twinkled with intelligence and something else. Something Lee couldn't quite put his finger on. "Thanks," Lee mumbled, still distracted by his encounter with Northern Lights. The man studied Lee for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "You look like you could use a drink and a friendly ear. Come on, I know just the place." Before Lee could protest, he found himself being steered towards a small, nondescript tavern tucked away in a side street. The sign above the door, weathered almost to illegibility, read the Polar Star. Inside, the tavern was warm and surprisingly cozy. A fire crackled in a large hearth, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke, ale, and something savory cooking. The man led Lee to a quiet corner booth. "The name's Ulrich," the man said as they sat down. "Ulrich Bernison." Lee's eyes widened in recognition. "The exiled Bear King. But you're—" Ulrich chuckled. "Human?" "Yes, for now. It's a long story, involving a witch, a curse, and a very angry walrus. But that's not important right now. What is important is what you're going to do about Northern Lights' offer." Lee's surprise turned to suspicion. "How did you know about that?" "As I said, it's dangerous to walk around with your head in the clouds here. People tend to notice things, especially when those things involve a young aeronaut meeting with the most notorious company in the North.